Silent Cowboy found a baby in the cabin and then froze when he saw her eyes, the mystery that changed everything. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the most desolate place on earth, where the wind carries secrets from 100 years ago, where every grain of sand has witnessed tragedy, where even the sun seems afraid to shine too bright. Now imagine you've lost everything that made life worth living. Your wife Maria dead from scarlet fever, her last words, a whisper of your name, your daughter, Isabella burned, alive in her cabin, while 7 months pregnant, screaming for a father who couldn't save her. Your soul shattered into fragments so small that even God himself couldn't piece them together. You are Elias Crow, once the most feared gunslinger in 3 territories, the man who outdrew the Brazos Kid, who single-handedly stopped the massacre at Redemption Creek, whose name made hardened killers cross themselves and ride the other way. But that was before the fire, before the failure. Before you buried your Colt .45 with your daughter's charred remains and swore never to speak again, for 3 years, you've been a ghost wandering the Badlands. The other cowboys whisper about you in saloons to Silent Crow. They call you a man so broken by grief that words themselves abandoned him. You haven't spoken, haven't smiled. I haven't done anything but exist in a world that lost all color the night Isabella died. But what if I told you that on one ordinary Tuesday in August 1882, everything you believed about that night was wrong? What if I told you that sometimes, just sometimes, the dead don't stay dead? And what if I told you that a single glance into a baby's eyes could unravel a conspiracy so dark, so impossible, that it would make you question the very nature of reality itself? This is not just a story about a cowboy who found a baby. This is a story about a father who buried his daughter, but whose daughter might have left something behind, a baby found in a place where no baby should be. Eyes that carry memories from beyond the grave. A brotherhood of killers hunting a secret worth more than gold. A mysterious woman who appears in mirrors and speaks in riddles. A grandfather's love that will be tested beyond human endurance, and a truth so devastating that knowing it might be worse than dying before we begin. I need you to understand 3 truths that will guide this tale. First truth, in the Badlands of 1882. Not everyone who dies stays dead. The desert has ways of preserving things, memories, sins, and sometimes, impossibly, people. Second truth, the Crawford cabin has been abandoned since the plague of '69. 13 years of emptiness. No one goes there. No one. The Apache say it's cursed. The settlers say it's haunted. Both are wrong. It's something far worse it's waiting. Third truth, those eyes, those distinctive golden brown eyes that Elias Crow will see in that cabin, they belong to someone who burned to death 3 years ago. Someone whose eyes he closed himself before laying her in the ground. They say every man has a breaking point. Elias Crow reached his nadir the night he watched his pregnant daughter burn. But when he pushes open that cabin door, when he hears that impossible sound echoing from the shadows, when he sees those eyes, those goddamn familiar eyes, he'll discover something terrifying. Some things can break a man twice, and some secrets are worth coming back from the dead to protect. So pour yourself 3 fingers of whiskey, lock your doors, check your windows, and prepare yourself for a tale that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the line between life and death. Because in the Badlands of South Dakota, in the year of our Lord 1882, Silent Crow is about to discover that his daughter Isabella took a secret to her grave. A secret that someone went to extraordinary lengths to dig back up. And that baby, in the cabin, she's not just any baby. She's the beginning of the impossible. Are you ready to learn why the vultures won't land? Are you prepared to discover what waits in the Crawford cabin? Can you handle the truth about those eyes? Then let us begin. As the story begins, comment, "I follow until the end," if you enjoy powerful narratives, and don't forget to follow the channel so you don't miss anything. The desert of broken souls. The man who forgot how to live. The morning sun painted the Badlands in shades of blood and rust. But Elias Crow saw none of its terrible beauty. He sat atop Moses, his black stallion, like a statue carved from grief and leather, watching the horizon with eyes that had forgotten how to hope. 3 years since he'd spoken a word. 3 years since he'd tasted food without ash, seen color without gray, heard music without screams. 3 years since the night that ended everything. The other cowboys called him Silent Crow now, though most were too afraid to call him anything to his face. His reputation might have been buried with his guns, but legends died harder than the men who made them, even broken, even silent. He carried an aura of violence, barely leashed like a wolf that had chosen not to bite but hadn't forgotten how. Moses shifted beneath him, the horse's movement bringing Alias back to the present. They were 2 days out from the last settlement, deep in the part of the Badlands where even the Apache refused to hunt. Here, the land itself seemed as rocks jutting from the earth like broken bones, arroyos that ran with dust instead of water, and a silence so complete it had weight. This was where Elias came to die slowly, where a man could disappear into the vastness and let the desert mummify, his soul grain by grain. He'd been doing a fine job of it too, until 3 nights ago. Until the dream. Isabella stood in their old kitchen, 7 months pregnant, her belly round with promise. Sunlight streamed through clean windows, and she was humming that Spanish lullaby Maria used to sing, the one about the moon protecting sleeping children. "Papa," she said without turning around, "you need to go to the Crawford place." "My daughter," his dream self replied, voice thick with tears. "You're dead. This isn't real." She turned then, and her eyes those distinctive eyes with gold rings. Around the brown were sad but urgent. "Death isn't as final as you think, Papa, and real. Real is what we make it. Now listen, because I can't stay long. The Crawford cabin. 3 days. When you see her eyes, you'll understand. Whose eyes? Isabella what? But she was already fading, becoming smoke and memory. The last thing he heard was her voice, distant as wind. "Trust what you see, not what you know, and Papa." Remember, Eve loved her before she was born. Elias had woken with tears freezing on his cheeks August in the Badlands, but his camp had been cold as winter. And in his chest, a pull like a fishhook embedded behind his ribs, drawing him southeast toward the one place everyone with sense avoided, the Crawford cabin, the place where stories die by noon. The temperature had climbed past 100, making the air shimmer like water. Elias followed game trails that weren't quite trails, paths that seemed to exist only when he wasn't looking directly at them. Moses, a veteran of 100 dangerous rides, grew increasingly nervous. The stallion's ears flicked constantly, tracking sounds that shouldn't exist in the empty desert. Then Elias saw them, the vultures, 13 of them circling high above, a distant mesa, but circling wrong. Vultures rode thermals in lazy spirals, conserving energy while they waited for death to finish its business. These birds flew in perfect formation, maintaining exact distances from each other, their pattern more like a ritual than natural behavior, and they'd been there for days. Elias could tell by the way they moved, exhausted but unable to stop, as if something compelled them to maintain their vigil, as if landing would break some terrible spell. "What are you guarding?" he whispered, his voice cracking from disuse. The first words he'd spoken in months were pulled from him by the sheer wrongness of the scene. Moses whinnied softly, and Elias realized they'd stopped moving. His hands, which never trembled, even in gunfights, shook as he raised his canteen. The water tasted of metal and old leather, but it was real, solid, a reminder that he wasn't dreaming. The Crawford cabin lay beneath those circling vultures, perhaps 2 miles distant. Even from here, Elias could feel it a wrongness in the world, like a tooth aching in the jaw of the desert. The cabin had been abandoned since '69, when Tom Crawford had murdered his entire family with an axe and then hanged himself from the porch beam. They said he'd been driven mad by isolation. He said he'd started seeing things that weren't there. Or maybe, Elias thought with a chill, he'd started seeing things that were her. The pull in his chest grew stronger, more insistent. Whatever had brought him here, Isabella's ghost, a fever dream, or his own madness, it wanted him to reach that cabin. Today, now, just an old building, he told Moses, trying to convince them both, wood and nails and bad memories. Nothing that can hurt us worse than we've already been hurt. But even as he urged the stallion forward, Elias's hand moved instinctively to his hip. Empty leather greeted his palm. His Colt .45 lay buried in Antelope Cemetery, placed in Isabella's coffin as a promise. No more violence, no more death. The gun that had made him famous would rust in the earth alongside his daughter. Now, approaching a place that radiated threat, like heat from a forge, he wondered if that promise had been wisdom or foolishness. The temperature dropped 20 degrees as they entered the shadow of the mesa. Impossible, the sun was directly overhead. There should be no shadow. But the wrongness around the Crawford place didn't care about Shub's details. Emerged as they drew closer. The cabin stood intact, which was wrong. 13 years of desert weather should have reduced it to splinters. The wood looked almost fresh, as if recently cut and planed. No sand piled against the walls, no tumbleweeds caught in the doorway, just that impossible preservation, like a photograph of a building rather than the building itself. Moses refused to go closer than 50 yards. The stallion planted his hooves and snorted, showing the whites of his eyes. Elias didn't blame him. Every instinct screamed, retreat. But the pull in his chest had become an ache, and somewhere beneath the fear, something else stirred. Hope. No, he'd buried hope with Isabella. But something like it, something that whispered maybe with each heartbeat. He dismounted, legs stiff from the long ride. Stay here, boy, if I'm not back by sunset. ... Double quotes. He trailed off. If he wasn't back by sunset, Moses would be fine. The horse knew the way home. It was Elias who was lost. Each step toward the cabin felt like walking through increasingly thick air. The wrongness pressed against him, testing his resolve. 20 yards, and from within, carried on air that smelled of sage and something sweeter, came a sound that stopped. Elias Cold, singing. A woman's voice, soft and low, humming a lullaby he knew in his bones. Maria's lullaby, the one she'd sung to Isabella every night for 16 years. The one Isabella had been humming when he'd walked her down the aisle. The one no living soul, except Elias, should know. His hand reached for the door, trembling like an old man's. The wood felt real enough, rough, grain, iron hinges that squealed as he pushed it wider. The singing continued, wordless, but unmistakable. God help me, Elias whispered, and stepped inside. The impossible child. The cabin's interior defied logic. Dust motes danced in shafts of golden light that streamed through cracks in the walls. But the air itself felt thick, almost solid. The singing came from everywhere and nowhere, a melody that seemed to exist in the spaces between heartbeats. Elias's eyes adjusted slowly to the dimness, picking out details that made no sense. A table set for dinner, food still fresh on the plates despite 13 years of abandonment, chairs arranged as if the family had just stepped out for a moment. And in the corner, where shadows gathered like mourners at a wake, a cradle, hand-carved from wood so dark it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The singing emanated from there, though Elias could see no one, just that gentle rocking, motion, as if invisible hands soothed an invisible child. He moved forward, each step requiring enormous effort. The floorboards beneath his boots felt soft, yielding, as if he walked on flesh rather than wood. His breathing came short and sharp, fogging in air that had no business being cold. The cradle drew him like gravity. As he approached, the singing stopped. The silence that replaced it was worse, expectant, hungry, waiting. Inside the cradle, wrapped in a blanket that might have been white once but now showed the yellow of age and neglect, lay a baby. Elias's knees buckled. He caught himself on the cradle's edge, wood biting into his palms. This was impossible. The cabin had been abandoned for 13 years. No one came here. No one could survive here. Yet the child was perfect, pink-cheeked, well-fed, sleeping peacefully as if the world beyond these walls wasn't a nightmare of death and isolation. The baby was maybe 6 months old, with wisps of dark hair and tiny fists curled in sleep. She wore a christening gown embroidered with roses, the kind of careful needlework that spoke of love and time and patience. The kind Maria had spent months creating for Isabella's baptism. The same pattern, the exact same roses, down to the number of petals. No, Elias breathed, but his hands were already reaching, already lifting the impossible child from her impossible cradle. She weighed what a baby should weigh, felt warm and real and alive in his arms. She smelled of milk and innocence and something else, something that made his eyes water and his chest tight. She smelled like home, like the house that had burned. Like Isabella, the baby stirred, making small sounds of protest at being disturbed. Her face scrunched in that way babies had when deciding whether to wake or settle back to sleep. Then, as if sensing the trembling in the arms that held her, she opened her eyes. The world ended. Time stopped. Elias's heart forgot how to beat, because those impossibly familiar eyes were Isabella's, not similar to Isabella's, not reminiscent of Isabella's. They were Isabella's eyes, complete with the distinctive gold ring around warm brown, complete with the tiny fleck of green in the left iris, complete with the way they seemed to see straight through to a person's soul. His daughter's eyes, looking up at him from a baby's face, his dead daughter's eyes, alive and aware and impossible. Isabella, the name came out broken, a question and a prayer and a denial all at once. The baby smiled Isabella's smile, the one that could light up a room or stop a fight before it started. She reached up with one perfect hand, tiny fingers grasping at his weathered face. And in that touch, Elias felt something inside him shatter, not breaking, but breaking open. All the grief, all the rage, all the frozen emptiness of the past. 3 years cracked like ice in spring. He was sobbing, great heaving sobs that shook his whole body, tears he'd been unable to shed at the funeral, at the burial, and in all the long nights since. They came now in a flood, dropping onto the baby's gown, and she watched him with those impossible eyes, patient and knowing. "How?" he asked, the empty cabin. "How can you have her eyes?" That's when he noticed the letter. Tucked into the blankets where the baby had lain was cream-colored paper that looked too new for this place of old death. His name was written on it in a hand he didn't recognize, elegant script that spoke of education and careful practice. Still holding the baby, he couldn't bear to put her down. Not when she looked at him with Isabella's eyes. He managed to unfold the letter one-handed. Elias Crow, by the time you read this, you will have seen the impossible. The child you hold is your blood, your legacy, and your burden. She is Isabella's daughter, saved from the fire by methods you would not understand, and I dare not explain. In writing, her name is Grace. Remember it well, for names have power, and she will need all the power she can gather in the days to come. Those who killed your daughter believe their work is complete. They must continue to believe this. The child's survival depends on their ignorance. Trust no one who claims to know of her existence. Trust no one who offers help without cost. Trust only what you see in her eyes, the truth that transcends death itself. You have 3 days before they realize their mistake. 3 days to disappear with a child everyone believes died in her mother's womb. Use them wisely. There are others who would use her for their own ends. The fire was not random. Isabella's death was not chance. There are forces at work, older and darker than you can imagine, and Grace stands at the center of their designs. Protect her, raise her, teach her to be strong. And when the time comes, Angie will know when it comes to tell her the truth about her mother's sacrifice. Destroy this letter. Burn the cradle. Leave no trace of your presence here. And whatever you do, whatever you see, whatever impossible things happen around Grace Believe. A friend in shadow, Elias, read it twice, his mind reeling. Isabella's daughter, his granddaughter. Saved from the fire by impossible means, hidden here in this place of death, waiting for him to find her. He looked down at Grace and felt, right? Felt like something Isabella would have chosen, and saw her watching him with ancient patience in infant eyes. She yawned, tiny and perfect, then nestled against his chest with absolute trust. "I buried your mother," he whispered. Saw her body, saw ... He couldn't finish. The memory of that charred cabin, the smell of smoke, and worse, Isabella's body, curled protectively around her swollen belly. He'd been so certain they'd all been certain. But those eyes, God help him, those eyes. A sound from outside broke through his thoughts, Moses, whinnying in alarm. The stallion never spooked without reason. Elias moved to the window, Grace secure in one arm, and peered through the dirty glass. The vultures were landing, all 13 of them settling in a perfect circle around the cabin. They folded their wings and stood motionless, heads turned. Outward, as if standing guard, as if protecting something precious from unseen threats. "Time to go," Elias murmured. Whatever strangeness had preserved this place, whatever miracle had kept Grace alive and waiting, he wouldn't question it. Not now. Later, when they were safe, when they were far from here, he'd try to understand. But now, there was only flight. He gathered what he could, the blankets, and a few items from the cabin that might be useful. The christening gown alone would be worth keeping, proof of the impossible when doubt inevitably crept in. But When he turned to deal with the cradle, as the letter instructed, he froze. The dark wood was smoking, thin wisps rising from its surface. As he watched, words appeared, burned into the grain by no visible hand. She dreams of choices not yet made. She sees through time's eternal shade. When 13 moons have passed, complete the broken circle will compete the rhyme made no sense. But Elias memorized it anyway. Then the cradle burst into flames-cold fire that gave no heat, consumed without smoke. In seconds, nothing remained but a circle of ash on the floor. Grace cooed in his arms, reaching toward. Where the cradle had been, her tiny hand opened and closed, grasping at nothing. Or perhaps at something only she could see. "Let's go, little one," Elias said, his voice steadier now. Having someone to protect gave him purpose. Having miraculous family gave him strength. "Let's get you away from here." He wrapped Grace carefully, fashioning a sling from the blankets to keep her secure against his chest. She seemed to approve, making contented sounds as he worked. When he stepped outside, the vultures turned their heads to watch, but didn't flee. One, larger than the rest, with feathers that seemed to hold their own shadows, spoke. Not with a vulture's cry, but with human words, though no beak should be able to form them. The key is retrieved. The door is closed. The vigil ends. Then, as one, they took flight, 13 shadows against the bright sky, dispersing to the four winds. In moments, the cabin stood alone again, just another ruin in the desert. Moses had calmed when Elias appeared, though the horse's eyes remained wild. He mounted carefully, Grace's weight strange but welcome against his chest. As they turned away from the Crawford place, Elias looked back once. The cabin was aging before his eyes. What that had seemed fresh moments ago now showed its true, years weathered, cracked, and sagging. The door fell from its hinges. The roof collapsed inward. In less than a minute, 13 years of delayed decay caught up, leaving only rubble and bad memories. "It was waiting," Elias said softly, understanding flooding through him. "The whole place was waiting for me. For us." Grace made a sound that might have been agreement. When he looked down, her eyes were closed, but she was smiling. Isabella's smile on a baby's face, peaceful and trusting. They rode hard through the afternoon, putting distance between them and whatever forces the letter had warned about. Elias's mind raced with questions, plans, and fears. Where could they go? Who could he trust? How did one raise a granddaughter, whose very existence was impossible? But beneath the uncertainty ran a deeper current. For 3 years, he'd been dead inside. A ghost wandering the earth, waiting for his body to catch up with his soul. Now, holding this impossible child, feeling her breath against his chest, he was terrifyingly, wonderfully alive. The sun was setting when they finally stopped to rest. Elias made camp in a box canyon, sheltered and defensible. As he prepared a bottle for Graceta, Cabin had provided supplies, somehow fresh, despite the years she watched him with those knowing eyes. "Your mother would have loved you," he told her. "Did love you. Enough to ... He paused, remembering the letter's words about sacrifice. What had Isabella done? What price had she paid to ensure her daughter's survival? Grace finished her bottle and burped with impressive volume for such a tiny thing. Elias found himself actually smiling for the first time in 3 years. "We'll figure it out," he promised her. "Whatever's coming, whatever they want with you, we'll face it together. You've got your mother's eyes, little one. Let's hope you've got her courage, too." As if in response, Grace reached up and patted his cheek with one tiny hand. Her touch was warm, solid, and real. Whatever impossible circumstances had brought them together, she was here. She was alive. She was family. And for a man who thought he'd lost everything, that was miracle enough. The stars came out brilliant in the clear desert air. Who'd stood up to bullies twice her size, who'd loved fiercely and completely. Grace listened with the attention only babies could manage, her eyes reflecting starlight. If you love stories that truly touch your heart, comment, "I'm here for the story," and make sure to subscribe. The next one might surprise you even more. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The letter's 3-day warning weighed on him. They'd need supplies, need to disappear, and need to become invisible in a land where strangers stood out like sore thumbs. But tonight, in this small circle of firelight, grandfather and granddaughter were safe. Sleep now, little miracle. Elias whispered as Grace's eyes grew heavy. "Dream of your mama. Dream of better days. And when you wake, we'll start the journey to keep you safe." Grace yawned, nestled closer, and drifted off to sleep. Her tiny hand remained fisted in his shirt, anchoring him to the present, to purpose, to hope. And for the first time in 3 years, when Elias Crow closed his eyes, he didn't see fire and death. He saw possibilities. He saw tomorrow as worth fighting for. He saw a future where Grace's impossible eyes would look at the world and find wonder instead of horror. It was enough to begin. The woman who knew too much, the town that forgot to die. San Miguel should have been dead. The silver mines had played out in '78. The cattle trails had shifted east. The railroad had chosen to bypass the town by 20 miles. By all rights, San Miguel should have joined the graveyard of settlements scattered across the territory. Another collection of empty buildings slowly being reclaimed by the desert. Instead, it thrived. Elias noticed the wrongness immediately as they approached through the morning heat. Too many people for a town with no visible means of support. Too many well-fed horses, too many buildings with fresh paint and glass windows that caught the light like watching eyes. Grace stirred against his chest, making small sounds of complaint. They'd been riding hard for 2 days, stopping only when absolutely necessary. The baby had been remarkably patient, but even miraculous children had limits. "Just a little further, little one," he murmured, using the endearment Isabella had loved. "We need supplies, then we'll find somewhere safe." But looking at San Miguel, he wondered if anywhere was truly safe. The town felt like a trap waiting. To spring, every instinct told him to ride on, to avoid this place that prospered when it should have withered. Yet Grace needed things he couldn't provide, from saddlebags and desert springs. Milk, clean cloth for diapers, food that didn't come from cans. And they needed information, news of who might be hunting them and where they might find sanctuary. The mission bells began to ring as they entered the outskirts. Not the regular tolling of ours, but a complex pattern that seemed almost like language. Grace's eyes snapped open at the sound, tracking something Elias couldn't see. "You hear?" "It too," he said softly. It wasn't a question. In 2 days of travel, he'd noticed how the baby responded to things beyond normal perception. The way she'd calm when danger was past, grow restless when threats approached. Whatever had saved her from the fire had left her with senses tuned. 2 frequencies most humans couldn't detect. Main Street stretched before them, busy despite the early hour, but the activity felt choreographed. People moved with too much purpose, their paths never quite intersecting. Like actors on a stage, maintaining positions, waiting for their cues, Elias guided Moses to the livery stable, run by a man who introduced himself as Samuel Hart. Had the soft look of someone who'd never worked hard labor, despite his supposed profession. "Passing through?" Hart asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Depends on what the town has to offer." Elias kept Grace turned away, her face hidden in the sling. "Need supplies? Maybe a room for the night. Mrs. Patterson runs a clean boarding house 2 doors down from the mission." Hart's eyes tried to pierce the shadows of Elias's hat. "She's got experience with discreet guests." The emphasis on discreet was subtle, but unmistakable. This was a town that specialized in not asking questions for a price. "Obliged," Elias said, leaving Moses with instructions for care. The horse didn't like being separated, but they'd draw less attention on foot. The boarding house was exactly where Hart had indicated, a 2-story building that managed to be both welcoming and fortress-like. Lace curtains that concealed more than they revealed. A front door of solid oak with iron reinforcements. Windows placed to provide clear fields of fire. Mrs. Patterson herself answered his knock. She was a handsome woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. She took in his travel-worn appearance and the careful way he held the bundle against his chest and made her own calculations. "Room and board?" she asked. "For tonight, maybe longer. $1 a day meals included. No visitors after dark, no gunplay, no questions asked or answered." She paused. "Are those terms acceptable?" "Yes, ma'am." She led him upstairs to a corner. Room clean and simple, with windows facing 2 directions and a door that locked from the inside, with a bar as well as a key. On the dresser sat a basin, fresh water, and surprisingly a small collection of baby supplies. Previous guests left those, Mrs. Patterson said, though her tone suggested she knew he'd know she was lying. Shame to waste them. After she left, Elias examined the supplies. Everything Grace needed, right down to the correct size of diapers. Either San Miguel was the luckiest town in the territory, or someone had known they were coming. He barred the door and checked the windows before tending to Grace. She was wet, hungry, and decidedly cranky about both situations. But as he changed her and prepared a bottle from the provided supplies, she watched him with those impossible eyes, patient despite her discomfort. "We're being watched," he told her, knowing she couldn't understand but needing to voice his suspicions. "This whole town is wrong, but wrong in our favor, for now." Grace gurgled agreement. Hungerand attacked the bottle with enthusiasm. While she ate, Elias studied the room more carefully. No dust on any surface, though the desert made daily accumulation inevitable. The water in the pitcher was cool. Despite the heat, and unless his ears were failing, he could hear music from somewhere not saloon piano, but something older, deeper, like monks chanting, but the words were in no language he recognized. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Crow, Dr. Harlan Walsh. Mrs. Patterson thought your cargo might benefit from examination." Elias tensed. He'd given no name at the boarding house. Through the door, he called, "Not necessary, perhaps not, but the child you're carrying has unique needs, the kind that normal medicine can't address, the kind that saved her from fire and hid her in places between heartbeats." Ice flooded Elias's veins. He set Grace carefully in the center of the bed, surrounded by pillows, and moved to the door. Through the gap beneath, he could see a single shadow. The doctor was alone, or seemed to be. "Who are you?" Elias demanded. "Someone who owes a debt to Isabella Hopkins. Someone who helped arrange what you found in the Crawford cabin. Someone who's been waiting 3 years for you to be ready to find her." The mention of Isabella by her married name decided him. Few had known she'd taken John's surname. Fewer still would connect it to Elias. He lifted the bar and opened the door, hand ready to grab for weapons he no longer carried. Dr. Walsh was younger than expected, perhaps 35, with the kind of face that could blend into any crowd. Average height, average build, brown hair and eyes. Forgettable, except for the way those eyes held depths that suggested he'd seen behind reality's curtain. "May I?" Walsh gestured toward the room. Elias stepped aside, watching the man carefully. Walsh moved directly to Grace, his manner professional but tinged with something like reverence. The baby studied him with her ancient eyes, then smiled. "Remarkable," Walsh breathed. "The integration is perfect. I wasn't sure it would hold, but ... double quotes, he glanced at Elias. "You have questions? Hundreds. Start with how my granddaughter is alive when I buried her mother." Walsh settled into the room's single chair, choosing his words carefully. "What do you know about the old sciences? The ones the church calls heresy and the universities call superstition?" "Nothing. I'm a simple man, doctor." "No, you're not. You're Elias Crow, the gunslinger who never missed, the killer who found conscience, the father who loved too fiercely." Walsh leaned forward, and now, the grandfather chosen to protect something that shouldn't exist but does. "Explain. Words, plain words, for impossible things." Walsh smiled sadly. "Very well. Your daughter was special, Mr. Crow. Not in ways that showed, but in her blood, her spirit. She carried a lineage that some would kill to possess and others would kill to destroy whose lineage? That's the question, isn't it? The bloodlines go back far to the conquistadors, to the native peoples they conquered. 2 things older than both. But what matters is this: Isabella knew. When she married John Hopkins, when she conceived, she knew what was coming. The fire was no accident. The Caraway gang were hired, though they never knew by whom. There are ... factions, old ones, fighting a war most people can't see over stakes, most wouldn't understand. Your daughter was caught in the middle." Elias moved to the window, watching the street below. People continued their choreographed movements, never quite touching, never quite meeting, and Grace was saved. At the moment of Isabella's death, when the fire reached them both, someone intervened, pulled the child sideways out of normal time and space, kept her safe in the places between, until you were ready, sideways. Elias tested the word, found it wanting. You're talking about magic. I'm talking about science so advanced it looks like magic. About knowledge preserved in hidden places. About the fact that reality is far more flexible than most believe. Walsh stood, moving to examine Grace again. The process left marks. She'll see things others can't, know things she shouldn't. As she grows, the abilities will manifest more strongly. Abilities? Did you think those were just Isabella's eyes? They are, in ways deeper than genetics. Part of your daughter lives on in Grace. Memories, knowledge, purpose. He touched the baby's cheek gently. She dreams Isabella's dreams sometimes. See through her eyes. It's why she recognized you immediately. The room spun slightly. Elias gripped the windowsill, anchoring himself. That's not possible. 3 days ago, would you have believed a baby could survive in an abandoned cabin for 3 years? That vultures could speak? That a cradle could burn with cold fire? Walsh's voice was gentle but insistent. The impossible is simply what we haven't understood yet. Grace chose that moment to voice her opinion, a loud burp, followed by contented gurgling. Both men looked at her, and she smiled, waving her tiny fists as if conducting music only she could hear. Why? Elias asked finally. Why save her? Why hide her? Why reveal her now? Because the war is entering a new phase. The factions are moving openly now. What was hidden must be protected. What was scattered must be gathered. Walsh moved toward the door. You'll have 3 days here. San Miguel is ... special, protected, but only for those who belong. After 3 days, the protection recognizes you as a resident or rejects you as a threat. And if we're rejected, then you'll wish the Caraway gang had found you first. Walsh paused at the door. There's a woman who runs the curiosity shop on 3rd Street, Madame Esperanza. Visit her tomorrow. She has things you'll need, and Mr. Crow. Trust your instincts, but trust Grace's more. She sees truer than either of us. Then he was gone, leaving Elias with more questions than answers, and a baby who might or might not contain pieces of his dead daughter's soul. The shop of forgotten things. Madame Esperanza's curiosities occupied a narrow building, squeezed between a barbershop and an undertaker-an placement that seemed deliberate rather than coincidental. The painted sign above the door showed an eye surrounded by stars, watching all who passed with unnerving awareness. Elias hesitated outside, Grace sleeping in her sling. The morning was already hot, but cold seemed to radiate from the shop's entrance. Through the dusty window, he could see shelves packed with objects that were hard to categorize, things that might be tools or weapons or decorations, depending on perspective and possibly on need. The door opened before he could knock. Elias, Crow. The woman in the doorway was ageless in the way of those who'd seen too much she could have. Been 40 or 70 or somewhere between. Dark skin, darker eyes, hair wrapped in a cloth that shimmered with colors that shouldn't exist. And little Grace. Come, we have much to discuss and little time to discuss it. The shop's interior defied the narrow frontage. Aisles stretched back further than the building could contain, lined with shelves that reached toward a ceiling lost in shadows. The air smelled of sage and copper and things that had no names. Madame Esperanza led them through the impossible space to a back room that felt more real solid chairs, a practical table, and tea brewing on a small stove. She gestured for him to sit, then poured 2 cups without asking if he wanted any. Your daughter came to me once, she said without preamble. 3 months before the fire, belly round with grace, eyes full of knowledge she wished she didn't have. Isabella was here. In San Miguel draws those who need it. A sanctuary for the strange, the threatened, the impossible. She sipped her tea, steam writhing in patterns that looked almost like words. She knew what was coming, wanted protections, preparations. I did what I could, which was taught her the words that would save Grace, showed her how to mark the child for retrieval, gave her the strength to do what needed doing when the time came. Esperanza's eyes were compassionate but unflinching. She died saying those words. Mr. Crow died sending her daughter sideways while her own body burned. There are few stronger magics than a mother's sacrifice. Elias's throat closed. He looked down at Grace, sleeping peacefully despite the strangeness surrounding them. Isabella had burned alive while casting whatever desperate spell had saved her baby. The agony she must have endured. She felt no pain at the end, Esperanza said softly, reading his thoughts or his face. The words took her beyond flesh before the fire truly reached her. She died in the between place, holding Grace, passing on what needed to be passed. It's why the child carries so much of her. Dr. Walsh said Grace has Isabella's memories, fragments, impressions, enough to recognize love, to trust where trust is warranted. As she grows, more may surface, or may not. The between place changes all it touches. Why are you helping us? Esperanza smiled, the expression transforming her face. Because it's Tuesday, at his confusion, she laughed a sound like bells, made of moonlight, an old joke, but truly, I help because the alternative is unthinkable. The factions Dr. Walsh mentioned, they're real, ancient, and they have plans for children like Grace. What plans? Some would use her as a key to unlock doors better left closed. Others would drain her specialness to fuel their own power. Still others would simply destroy her to prevent the first two outcomes. She refilled his tea without asking. None asked what Grace herself might choose. She's a baby. She can't choose anything, can she? Esperanza gestured, and Delilah turned to find Grace. Awake, watching them with those impossible eyes. Even now, she chooses to trust you. She chooses to be content, despite the strangeness of her existence. Choices need not be verbal to be valid. Grace reached for the teacup, fascinated by the steam. Esperanza produced a bottle of milk from nowhere, literally nowhere. The air simply yielded it and handed it over. The baby accepted it as if furniture manifesting from nothingness was perfectly normal. What am I supposed to do? Elias asked. I'm one man, no home, no allies, no idea what I'm protecting her from. Then let's address those lacks. Esperanza stood, moving to a cabinet that definitely hadn't been there moments before. First, allies. San Miguel is full of those who fled the factions. Some will help, simply because it's right, others need convincing. But all understand the value of standing together. She pulled out items, seemingly at random a compass that pointed to something other than north. A leather journal that smelled of years. A silver chain hung with symbols that made his eyes water. Second, knowledge. This journal was Isabella's. She left it in my keeping, knowing you'd come eventually. Everything she learned about Grace's nature, about the factions, about what's coming it's all there. Elias took the journal with shaking hands. Isabella's writing covered the pages, that careful script he'd taught her when she was 6. Even a glance showed diagrams, notes, and questions circled frantically. His daughter had been fighting this battle long before the fire. Third, protection. The compass and chain joined the journal. The compass points toward others like Grace children born between worlds, carrying impossible gifts. The chain will warn you of faction members. It grows cold near those who serve the old powers. How many others, like Grace, we don't know. They're hidden, protected, and scattered. Some may not even know what they are yet, but they exist, and they're in danger. Esperanza returned to her seat. Which brings us to the choice you must. Make what choice? Stay in San Miguel. It's safe, for now. Raise Grace quietly, hope the factions forget about her. Live a small, careful life. She paused. Or take up your daughter's work. Find the other children. Protect them. Teach them. Build something the factions never expected. Third option, I'm not a leader, not a teacher. I'm a killer who got tired of killing, and Isabella was just a rancher's daughter, which Juan was. Just a cowhand with dreams. None of us are what we were, Mr. Crow. We become what necessity demands. Grace finished her bottle and reached for Elias, making the small sounds that meant she wanted holding. He lifted her, feeling her weight like anchoring. She patted his face with one tiny hand, and he could swear he felt Isabella in that touch. His daughter's gentleness in his granddaughter's gesture. What would Isabella want, he asked. For Grace to be safe, for the other children to have a chance. For the cycle of hunting and hiding to end, Esperanza smiled sadly. She knew you'd ask that. There's a letter in the journal, page 47. With Grace balanced in one arm, Elias opened to the indicated page. Isabella's writing, but shakier than the rest, dated 2 days before the fire. Papa, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened and the best has too. I'm gone, but Grace lives. Hold her for me, love her for me, teach her to be strong. I know you'll want to hide, to take her somewhere distant and safe and small. Part of me wants that too. But Papa, there are other children, other families who will face what we faced, other parents who will lose what we lost. Don't let my death be just another tragedy. Make it mean something. Save the others. Build what I couldn't, a place where impossible children can grow without fear. I know it's too much to ask, but you're Elias Crow. You've done impossible things before. Do one more. For me, for Grace, for all of them. Your loving daughter, Isabella P.S. Trust Esperanza. Trust the doctor. Trust the town. But mostly, trust yourself. You're stronger than you know. The letter blurred as tears came. Even dead Isabella was still teaching him, still pushing him to be better than he was. Well, Esperanza asked gently. Elias looked at Grace, who was chewing on her fist with great concentration. She had her whole life ahead of her. A life of hiding or a life of purpose, safety or meaning. The small path or the large one. Tell me about the factions, he said. Tell me what I'm fighting. Then, tell me how to win. Esperanza's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Now you sound like your daughter. Very well. Let's begin with the order of closed doors. The gathering storm by the third night, Elias understood why San Miguel thrived when it should have died. The town was a nexus, a gathering place for those touched by the impossible. Every resident had a story of escape, of loss, of power discovered or thrust upon them. They'd built a community of the strange hidden in plain sight. The saloon served drinks that helped men forget or remember, depending on need. The general store stocked items that existed only when necessary. The church offered sanctuary that even creatures of shadow respected. And beneath it all, a network of tunnels connected safe houses, escape routes, and chambers where impossible things could be discussed without fear. Elias had met a dozen potential allies in as many hours. Maria Santos, who could speak with the dead, including, she claimed, Isabella Thomas Hart, no relation to Samuel, a former soldier who'd developed the ability to step through mirrors after a Comanche curse, Chen Wei, whose drawings came alive when nobody was looking. Each had fled something. Each had found sanctuary in San Miguel. Now, as midnight approached on his third day, Elias sat in the mission with Father Miguel, a priest, who'd made his own accommodations with the impossible. Your presence has caused ripples, the father said, polishing a chalice that gleamed with more than silver. The factions know someone significant has arrived. They're testing our boundaries. Let them test. Elias checked on Grace, sleeping in a basket beside the pew. The chain Esperanza had given him lay ice cold against his chest. Enemies were near. I'm not running anymore, brave words, but you've seen only the smallest taste of what they can do. The Order of Closed Doors believes all passages between worlds should be sealed. They'd kill Grace simply for what she represents, a living bridge between states of being and the others. The Crimson Path seeks to throw all doors open, let every nightmare and wonder pour through at once. They believe chaos will remake the world in forms more to their liking. Father Miguel crossed himself and the Hollow Crown. They collect special children, drain them of power, use them as batteries for their workings. 3 factions, all of them willing to kill children for their cause, which is why Isabella sought a 4th way. Why do Dr. Walsh, Madame Esperanza, and all of us risk everything to protect the innocent? The priest stood as bells began to toll, not the regular marking of hours, but an alarm, and why we must defend what we've built here. The church doors burst open. Samuel Hart, the false stable hand, stumbled in, blood streaming from wounds that looked like claw marks. They're here, he gasped. Hollow Crown, dozens of them. They've surrounded the town. Elias was moving before the words finished. He scooped up Grace, who woke with a startled cry, and followed Father Miguel to the tunnel entrance hidden beneath the altar. Others were already gathering, the strange citizens of San Miguel, preparing to defend their sanctuary, the tunnels. Organized chaos reigned. Weapons were distributed, some conventional, others decidedly not. Madame Esperanza handed out charms that would reveal hidden enemies. Dr. Walsh prepared medical stations for the wounded that would surely come through it all. Grace watched with those ancient eyes, seeming to understand the gravity of the moment. They want her, Esperanza said, appearing at Elias's elbow. The Hollow Crown has a new leader, someone who claims to know exactly what Grace is and how to use her. They're willing to destroy San Miguel to claim her over my dead body. That's precisely their plan. She pressed something into his hand, a revolver, but unlike any he'd seen, the metal seemed to shift between states, sometimes solid, sometimes flowing. This was Isabella's cheat. Had it made for you, knowing this day would come. The gun felt right in his hand, like coming home after years of wandering. He'd buried his Colt with Isabella, but she'd apparently prepared a replacement. Even in death, his daughter looked after him. How do we fight them? Together, as a community. As a family? Esperanza's smile was fierce. They expect scattered individuals. They'll find something else entirely. Above, the sounds of battle began. The Hollow Crown had made their move, assuming San Miguel would fall easily. They'd forgotten or never known that the impossible, when united, becomes unstoppable. Stay with the children, Elias told Esperanza, handing Grace over, despite every instinct screaming to keep her close, keep her safe, and you. He checked the impossible gun, felt its weight settle into his palm like destiny. I'm going to remind them why they used to fear the name Elias Crow. But as he headed for the surface, for the battle that would determine Grace's fate, her voice stopped him. Not crying, not babbling. A single word, clear as mountain water. Papa? He turned to find Grace reaching for him, her expression serious beyond her years. Isabella's eyes in a baby's face, full of love and warning, and something that might have been goodbye. I'll come back, he promised, kissing her forehead. Your mama taught me how to do impossible things. This is just one more. Then he was climbing toward the sound of gunfire and screaming and the clash of powers beyond normal understanding. A baby's voice, but carrying harmonics that made the tunnel walls strengthen and the defenders' hearts lift. The battle for San Miguel had begun, and at its heart, an impossible child sang her mother's songs and waited to see if her grandfather could work one more miracle. The first Hollow Crown enforcer, Elias, met upon emerging died with a look of complete surprise. They'd expected a broken old man. They got Silent Crow with a purpose. The impossible gun spoke in tongues of fire and frost, each shot finding its mark with supernatural accuracy. Where bullets struck, reality reasserted itself, illusions collapsed, possessed humans were freed, and creatures of shadow fled back to whatever hell had spawned them. Raised the spirits of the town's founders, who rose from consecrated ground to defend their legacy. Thomas Hart pulled enemies through mirrors, trapping them in reflected worlds. Chen Wei's drawings swarmed from walls and paper, ink tigers and graphite dragons tearing into Hollow Crown forces. But they were outnumbered. For every enforcer that fell, two more seemed to take their place. And worse, Elias could feel something vast approaching, a presence that made the air thick and reality thin. The new leader, Father Miguel, gasped, appearing at his side with robes singed and crucifix glowing. He comes himself, through smoke and chaos. A figure approached. When he spoke, his voice was every parent's grief-given sound. Elias Crow, Isabella's father, Grace's protector, you've caused us considerable trouble. Just getting started, Elias growled, raising the impossible gun. Are you the figure? Gestured, and the gun, ... changed. It became a snake that writhed in Elias' grip before he could drop it. Then became a chain that tried to bind him. Then became a memory of every person he'd killed, their faces accusing. But Elias had carried that guilt for years. It held no fresh horror. He gripped the shifting weapon and forced his will upon it, making it remember its true shape. The gun reformed, solid and ready. Impressive. Isabella chose her champion well. The hooded figure moved closer, shadows writhing. But you cannot win. Grace belongs to us. She is the key to powers you cannot imagine. She's a baby, my granddaughter. That's all, is she? The figure laughed, a sound like hope dying. Do you even know what you protect? What did Isabella create? Your granddaughter is not human, Elias Crow, not anymore. Has she not spoken words? No infant should know. Shown awareness beyond her days. You've felt Isabella in her, haven't you? That's because Isabella is in her. Along with so much more, the battle continued around them. But Elias found himself frozen. The hooded figure stepped closer, shadows parting to reveal a face that was hauntingly familiar. John, Elias breathed. Johns Hopkins, Isabella's husband, who had supposedly died in the fire alongside her. His smile was winter-given form. Surprised, you shouldn't be. Did you really think the fire was meant for Isabella alone? We all had our parts to play. You're dead. I saw your body. You saw what you needed to see. What Isabella needed you to see. John spread his hands, shadows following the gesture. She was brilliant, your daughter. Saw the game entire, knew the only way to save Grace was to make everyone believe she'd died. Even me, even you. You betrayed her, betrayed your own child. I saved her. The shout made reality ripple. Isabella was going to let Grace be normal. Waste her potential. Hide her gifts. I showed her another way. Showed her how Grace could become something magnificent. By burning them alive. By transforming them, the fire was never meant to kill it, was meant to change. Fervor, Isabella fought me. Yes. Forced Grace sideways before the transformation was complete, but enough remained. Your granddaughter is half human, half something else. A bridge between worlds. And you want to finish what you started. I want to perfect her. Complete the work, Isabella interrupted. John gestured, and the battle around them slowed. Fighters moving as if through thick honey. Join me, Elias, or stand aside and let inevitability take its course. Elias looked at the man his daughter had loved, the man she'd trusted with her life and their child. Quietly, she chose Grace's humanity over your ambitions. I'll honor that choice, then you'll die with the rest. John raised his hand, shadows coalescing into a spear of pure darkness. But before he could strike, singing filled the air. Not from one throat, but dozens the children of San Miguel, led by Grace's infant voice, raised in Isabella's lullaby. The song did something to the shadows, made them remember light, made them recall what they'd been before corruption claimed them. John's spear wavered, and in that moment of uncertainty, Elias struck. Not with a gun, not with violence, but with memory. She loved you, he said, pulling out the journal Isabella had left. Even knowing what you'd become, she loved you. Look. He opened to a page near the end, Isabella's last entry. His eyes scanned the words, and for the first time since the hood had fallen, he looked human. John, I know what you're planning. I've seen it in your eyes, felt it in the way you watch Grace growing within me. You think power is worth any price. But my love, you're wrong. By wonder, not as some weapon for faction wars. I will stop you. I will save her from what you'd make her, for what's to come. You're sick with ambition, poisoned by promises of power. That's not the man I married. That man is still in there, somewhere. If you find this, if you read these words, remember, you have a choice. You've always had a choice. Choose love over power. Choose grace over glory. Choose to be the father. She deserves forever yours. Isabella, the journal fell from nerveless fingers. John's shadows writhed unstable, reflecting inner turmoil. She knew, he whispered. All along, she knew, and she still loved you, Elias finished, just as she loved Grace. Love was always Isabella's greatest strength. I killed her. You tried to change her. She chose another path, Elias. Stepped closer, lowering the gun. But you can still choose. John, even now, even after everything, you can choose to be the man she believed was still inside you. John fell to his knees, shadows dispersing like smoke. The Hollow Crown enforcers, suddenly leaderless, faltered. Some fled, others surrendered. A few, freed from whatever compulsion had driven them, simply sat down and wept. I can't undo it, John said, looking up with eyes that were finally clear. To fire, the transformation. What I've made Grace into, no. But you can help protect what Isabella saved. Help us build. The sanctuary she envisioned, Elias offered his hand. Be the father Grace needs, not the leader the Hollow Crown wants. For a long moment, past and future balanced on a knife's edge. Then John took the offered hand, and grandfather helped father to his feet. She hate me, John said. When she learns the truth, maybe, or maybe she'll do what Isabella did see, the man beneath the mistakes. Elias looked toward the mission, where Grace's song still rang clear, but that's her choice to make, when she's old enough, when she's strong enough. All of them. John's voice was steadier now, planning instead of despairing. They'll come harder, stronger, broken, complicated, built on tragedy and betrayal, and impossible forgiveness. but family nonetheless. As the sun rose over San Miguel, painting the battleground in shades of gold and shadow, the impossible town had proven its worth. They'd faced one faction and survived. But Grace's song, carried on the desert wind, was more than a victory celebration. It was a call, a beacon. Somewhere out there, other impossible children heard it, felt the promise of sanctuary, began their own journeys toward San Miguel. But for the first time since that night of fire and loss, Elias Crow felt something he'd thought burned away forever. Hope. And in the mission, surrounded by those who'd fought for her, Grace continued to sing. Isabella's daughter, carrying her mother's song into a future bright with terrible possibility. Comment below. I want more stories like this, and don't forget to follow the channel. There are many emotional stories coming your way. The School of Impossible Children. 5 years later, Grace Delgado, the name they'd given her for safety, sat in the courtyard of what had once been San Miguel's schoolhouse, watching reality bend around her fingers like taffy. At 5 years old, she looked almost normal. Brown hair that caught gold in the sunlight, Isabella's eyes, ancient and knowing. A smile that could light up rooms or break hearts, depending on her mood. But normal children didn't make flowers bloom in reverse, aging backward into seeds. Normal children didn't have conversations with people who weren't there, or, rather, who were there in ways only Grace could perceive. And normal children certainly didn't teach classes to other impossible boys and girls who'd found their way to San Miguel's sanctuary. Again, Grace said, her child's voice carrying unexpected authority. Remember, Timothy, you're not making the water disappear. You're asking it to be somewhere else. There's a difference. Timothy Chen, 7 years old and still learning to control his ability to relocate objects through space, screwed up his face in concentration. The glass of water before him flickered, wavered, and then successfully transported itself to the other side of the courtyard. Unfortunately, it arrived upside down. Better, Grace clapped her hands, genuinely delighted. Tomorrow will work. On orientation. Who's next? Elias watched from the doorway, marveling at how natural she was with the other children. 23 of them now, gathered from across the territory and beyond. Each one impossible in their own way. Each one hunted by factions that would use or destroy them. Each one finding safety in San Miguel's growing sanctuary. She's remarkable, John said, joining him. Isabella's husband had aged a decade in 5 years, his hair gone gray at the temples, lines carved deep by guilt and purpose. But he'd kept his promise, protecting Grace, helping build the school, seeking redemption one saved child at a time. She's Isabella's daughter, Elias replied. She's more than that. John watched Grace help a younger child, Delilah, who could split into multiple versions of herself, gather her scattered selves. The changes I started. They went deeper than I understood. She's not just bridging worlds anymore, she's creating new ones. It was true. As Grace had grown, her abilities had evolved in unexpected ways. Where once she could only see through the veils between realities, now she could weave them together. Create pocket spaces where impossible things become possible. Build sanctuaries within sanctuaries, like the courtyard itself. From outside, it looked perhaps 30 feet square, but inside, space folded and expanded according to need. Today, it was large enough for 24 children to practice without crowding. Tomorrow, who knew? The factions are moving again, John continued, lowering his voice. My ... former associates in the Hollow Crown have selected new leadership, someone called the Weaver, and the Order of Closed Doors has issued a formal declaration. Any child harboring unnatural abilities is to be surrendered for cleansing. Let them come. Elias checked the impossible gun at his hip. Isabella's gift had become a constant companion. We've fought them before, not like this. They're organizing, coordinating. The 3 factions have called a temporary truce to deal with what they call the San Miguel problem. John turned to face him fully. They're coming, Elias, all of them, together. Before Elias could respond, a ripple passed through the air. Wrong, invasive. Like reality itself, had developed a fever. The children felt it too several, cried out, powers flaring involuntarily, windows cracked, shadows danced independently. And in the center of it all, Grace stood perfectly still, her eyes reflecting infinities. They're here, she said in a voice too old for her years. All of them, they brought an army. The mission bells began to toll not the measured warning of approaching danger, but a frantic clanging that spoke of immediate threat. From across the town, Elias heard shouts, screams, and the sound of impossible weapons being deployed. "Get the children to the deep sanctuary," he ordered John. "Alert the defenders." "And John," he gripped the younger man's shoulder. "Whatever happens, Grace lives." "Understood, understood." John was already moving, calling out evacuation orders. The impossible children responded with trained efficiency they'd drilled for this moment, hoping it would never come. But Grace didn't move. She stood in the center of the courtyard, small hands clenched at her sides, facing something only she could see. "Little one," Elias said gently, using Isabella's pet name. "We need to go." "No," Grace's voice carried, harmonics that made the air shiver. "They're not here for the others. They're here for me. If I run, they'll tear the town apart looking." She turned to him, and her eyes held terrible knowledge. "If I face them, maybe I can make them see." "See what?" "That there's another way. That we don't have to be weapons or victims or hidden things." Her chin lifted with Isabella's stubbornness. "That we can choose to be something new." "You're 5 years old. I'm 5 years old and 17 lifetimes, and a bridge between worlds and my mother's daughter." Grace smiled, sad and fierce and beautiful. "Trust me, Grandpa, please." Elias wanted to refuse, wanted to scoop her up and run, find another sanctuary, another life. But looking at her, at Isabella's eyes, holding wisdom earned through fire, and Lossie knew she was right. They couldn't run forever. Someone had to make a stand together then. He said, "Together," she agreed, and slipped her small hand into his. They walked through San Miguel's chaotic streets, grandfather and granddaughter moving against the tide of fleeing residents. The faction forces had surrounded the town. Elias could see them through gaps between buildings. Hundreds of enforcers, armed with weapons both mundane and impossible, creatures summoned from spaces between spaces, machines that hurt to perceive directly. At the town's heart, where Main Street opened into a plaza, the leaders waited. 3 figures, each representing absolute conviction in their cause. The Order's supreme cleaner wrapped in white that seemed to drain color from everything around. Her, the Crimson Path's Hierophant, whose form shifted constantly between states of being, and the Hollow Crown's new weaver, face hidden behind a mask of living silver. Grace Hopkins, the cleaner, spoke first, her voice like antiseptic given sound. "You will come with us. The contamination you represent must be contained." Grace Delgado, the Hierophant, corrected, its 1,000 voices speaking in unison. "We'll open the doors, all of them. Let chaos remake this stagnant world." "Grace," the weaver said simply, "you will complete what your father began. Become the bridge fully. Serve your purpose." "No." Grace stepped forward, releasing Elias's hand. In the space between heartbeats, she changed. Not physically, she remained a 5-year-old girl in a sun-faded dress. But reality around her deepened layers, becoming visible. Every possible version of this moment spread out like a deck of cards, and Grace stood at the center, choosing. "I am Grace, sometimes Hopkins, sometimes Delgado, always myself," she announced, her child's voice carrying to every corner of the plaza. "I am the daughter of Isabella who saw true, and John who saw wrong, and Elias who sees with love. I am human, and more and less, and different." The faction leaders recoiled as if slapped. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. The child should cower, or fight, or run, not ... whatever this was. "You want me to close all doors?" Grace continued, looking at the cleaner. "But doors exist for a reason. Some should be open, some should be shut. Some should be left ajar for those who need passage." "You want me to break everything open?" she told the Hierophant. "But chaos without choice is just another kind of tyranny. Freedom means being able to say no as well as yes. And you," she faced the weaver, "want me to be a tool. But people aren't tools. We're not weapons or bridges or keys. We're children who deserve to grow up without fear." "Enough." The cleaner raised a weapon that looked like crystallized purity. "If you won't come willingly, stop." The word carried weight. Not volume. Grace didn't shout, but the simple command rippled outward, and suddenly everyone in the plaza found themselves unable to move. Not frozen, but ... paused. as if Grace had politely asked reality to hold its breath for a moment. "This is what you don't understand," Grace said, walking between the frozen figures. "You think power is about forcing others to do what you want. But real Power Mama's kind of power is about helping others see they have choices." She touched the cleaner's weapon, and it bloomed into a rosebush, heavy with impossible colors. "You're afraid of contamination, but contamination is just another word for change, and change is how we grow." She moved to the Hierophant, its myriad forms cycling even in stasis. "You worship chaos, but chaos isn't freedom. It's just another cage. True freedom is choosing your own shape, not having it chosen by randomness." Finally, she stood before the Weaver. Through the silver mask, she could see hints of the face beneath neither male nor female. Old nor young, but somehow familiar. "And you, you're the saddest of all. You think purpose means destiny, but purposes can change. People can change, even you." The pause ended. The three leaders stumbled, suddenly free but shaken. Around the plaza, their forces stirred uneasily. They'd come expecting a battle. Instead, they'd found a 5-year-old philosopher. "Impossible," the Weaver breathed. "You're just a child. You can't, I can't, what?" Grace tilted her head. "Can't think, can't choose." "Can't you refuse to be what you want me to be?" She spread her arms wide, and reality rippled. "Watch me." What happened next would be debated, disputed, and disbelieved for generations. But everyone present agreed. On the basics, Grace Delgado, 5 years old and impossible, offered every person in the plaza choice, not with words, not with force, but by opening a door in their minds, a door to themselves. To them, they were beneath faction loyalty and learned hatred. The enforcers saw themselves as they'd been before recruitment, remembered families, dreams, the moment they'd traded humanity for purpose. Some wept, some raged, but all saw, then allied. Several simply faded away, returning to where they belonged. Others chose to stay, but as themselves rather than weapons. Even the three leaders found themselves confronted with truth. The cleaner saw herself as a young woman, terrified by a world that changed too fast, seeking control through elimination of variables. She saw the faces of every contaminated child she'd ordered cleansed, saw what had been lost. The Hierophant experienced its own chaos and felt the terror of existing without form or foundation. Understood that its worship of disorder came from a desperate need to justify its own fractured existence. And the Weaver saw beneath its own mask. Saw the person who'd voluntarily become a function had been worth it. "Choose," Grace said simply. "All of you right now. Choose who you want to be." The plaza erupted in chaos, but chaos of a different kind. Faction members threw down weapons or turned them on former allies. Philosophical arguments broke out. Some fled, unable to face the weight of choice. Others fell to their knees, overwhelmed by possibility. Through it all, Grace stood calm at the center, a fixed point in a turning world. Elias moved to her side, gun drawn but unnecessary. The battle was over, though not a shot had been fired. "You did it," he said quietly. "You actually did it." "No," Grace corrected, watching the transformation unfold. "They did it. I just reminded them they could." She swayed slightly, exhaustion hitting as the impossible feat took its toll. "Grandpa, I think I need a nap." He scooped her up, 5 years old, and savior of San Miguel, as she yawned against his shoulder. Around them, the careful order of faction. Warfare dissolved into something messier, but more honest people choosing for themselves what to believe, what to fight for, and what to become. Not all chose well. Some enforcers fled back to their strongholds, clinging to old certainties. But many stayed, asked questions, sought new purposes. The three leaders stood apart, each grappling with revelation. Finally, the cleaner spoke, her voice hoarse with unshed tears. "What are we supposed to do now?" "Learn," John Hopkins said, emerging from the shadows where he'd watched his daughter work miracles. "Help us teach the children. Not to be weapons or bridges, but to be themselves. Fully, safely. You'd trust us?" the Hierophant asked, its form stabilizing into something almost human. "After everything, my daughter taught me about redemption," John replied. "About choosing who to be despite who you've been. The offer stands." One by one, decisions were made. The cleaner who remembered her name was Sarah chose to stay. The Hierophant, seeking stability and purpose, agreed to help teach control to children whose powers defied physics. Even the Weaver, unmasked as a person named Morgan who'd forgotten their own identity, asked to learn rather than lead. Not everyone was happy. Faction loyalists raged about betrayal and corruption. Townsfolk worried about harboring former enemies. The impossible children themselves were divided, some eager to forgive, others bearing scars too deep for easy absolution. But Grace had done something more profound than defeat enemies. She'd transformed them into people. Complicated, flawed, choosing people. As the sun set over San Miguel, painting the transformed plaza in shades of gold and possibility, Elias carried his granddaughter home. She slept with the total abandon of childhood, occasionally murmuring words that reshaped reality in small vase flowers blooming from cracks in stone, broken windows healing themselves, shadows dancing to unheard. Music. Will it last? Madame Esperanza asked, meeting them at the boarding house. This transformation. Some of it, Elias said. Enough, maybe. Change is slow, even when it comes all at once. And the other factions, those who weren't here, will come eventually, but different now. The unity is broken. Some will seek war, others negotiation, and still others will simply fade as their members choose other paths. He shifted Grace's sleeping weight. She didn't end the conflict, but she changed its nature. From war to choice, Esperanza mused. Your Isabella would be proud. Isabella is proud, Grace mumbled, without opening her eyes. She says to tell. You, the roses in the memory garden, need water. Both adults froze. There was no memory garden in San Miguel, but that night, they would find one a small space behind the mission where impossible roses grew. Moment from someone lost. Isabella's gift to the town, delivered through her daughter's dreams. The war for the impossible children wasn't over, but it had transformed into something else, a conversation about what it meant to be human when humanity itself was expanding. A negotiation between those who feared change and those who embodied it. A school where former enemies taught alongside former victims, all learning together what it meant to choose. Had become something unprecedented, neutral ground, where factions sent representatives to talk rather than fight. The impossible children still needed protection, but now that protection came from unexpected sources. Sarah, the former cleaner, had redesigned the town's defenses to filter harmful intent rather than different beings. Chosen the name Alex Dodd, advanced control techniques that turned chaotic powers into precise tools. Morgan, the former weaver, used their understanding of connections to help children learn to work together without losing individuality. And at the center of it all, Grace continued to grow. Not just in size, though she'd gained 2 inches and lost her first tooth butt in understanding. She spent mornings in regular classes, learning to read and write and do arithmetic, like any child. Afternoons were for specialized training, helping newer arrivals understand their abilities. But evenings were hers, and she spent them as any 5-year-old should, playing with friends, listening to stories, being tucked in by her grandfather, and being told she was loved. Stuffed Rabbit John had made her. About when she was little, like me, Elias settled onto the bed beside her. This ritual, as precious as any he'd known. Your mama was fierce from the day she was born. Came out fighting, the midwife said. Didn't cry, just looked around like she was sizing up the world, deciding if it was worth her time. Grace giggled. Was it worth her time? She decided. It was, but only if she could make it better. Even as a little girl, she was always fixing things. Broken wings on birds, hurt feelings between friends. She couldn't stand to see suffering without trying to help. Like me with the faction people. Just like that. He smoothed her hair, still amazed by how much she looked like Isabella at this age. But she was also wild. Loved to ride horses to fast and climb trees to high. Scared me and your grandma half to death with her adventures. I want to ride horses, Grace said thoughtfully. Fast ones. When you're older, I'm already older. I'm 5 3/4, that's very old. Ancient, Elias agreed solemnly, practically ready for retirement. But then her expression grew serious, in that way she had child to ancient soul in a heartbeat. Grandpa, do you think Mama's proud of me, of what I did? I know she is. How do you know? He could have mentioned the impossible roses, the dreams where Isabella visited, and the moments when Grace spoke with her mother's voice. But instead, he chose a simpler truth, because everything you do comes from love. And that's what your mama taught us, all that love is the strongest force there is. Stronger than fear, stronger than hate, stronger than even death. Grace considered this. Is that why the factions were so scared? Because they forgot about love? Maybe? Or maybe they loved the wrong things. Power instead of people? Control instead of connection? He tucked the blanket around her. But you reminded them they had other choices. I just showed them doors, Grace protested. They had to walk through themselves. Wisest thing I've heard all day. You're helping Timothy with his orientation problem. Remember, no more upside-down water glasses. Her eyes were already closing. Night, Grandpa. Love you. Love you too, little one. Sweet dreams. But as he turned to leave, she spoke once more, her voice drifting between waking and sleep. Mama says to check the journal, page 100. There's something you need to see. Elias froze. Isabella's journal had ended on page 93. He'd read it cover to cover dozens of times. There was no page 100, yet when he retrieved the journal from his room and opened it, there it was. New pages, written in Isabella's hand. Impossible but undeniable. Papa, if you're reading this, then Grace has grown strong enough to bridge not just worlds but times. I can write to you now from then, sending words across the veil she's made thin. I want you to know you've done everything right. Every choice, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt, they all led to where Grace needed to be. The war isn't over. Maybe it never ends completely. But it's changed, and that's what matters. The impossible children have a chance now, a real chance, not just to survive, but to thrive, to be themselves fully without fear. Tell John I forgive him. Tell him our daughter sees him clearly now, and what she sees is worth saving. Tell Grace I love her beyond words, beyond death, beyond the boundaries of what should be possible. Tell her she carries the best of all of my hope, your strength, and John's vision cleared of corruption. Tell her she's perfect, exactly as she is. And Papa, thank you for not giving up, for finding her, for becoming the man she needed you to be. Now the whole world knows it. There will be more challenges. Children who need saving. Factions that resist change. All of us who've touched Grace's life and been transformed by it. Love doesn't end with death. It just changes shape. Watch for the signs. A shadow that falls upward. A flower that blooms out of season. A moment when the impossible becomes inevitable. We're all around you, cheering you on. Until we meet again, and we will, though not in ways you expect, your loving daughter. Elias read the letter 3 times, tears streaming freely. Then he walked to the window and looked out at San Miguel, transformed, thriving, impossible. Somewhere in the darkness, former enemies worked alongside former victims. And at the heart of it all, a 5-year-old girl slept peacefully, dreaming of bridges. Between worlds, for teaching an old killer how to build instead of destroy. A warm breeze touched his face, carrying the scent of roses that bloomed in no earthly garden. Terrible possibility. There would be challenges, setbacks, and sorrows, but also joy, discovery, and the endless potential of children who refuse to be limited by the world's expectations. Grace had shown them all the doors. Now it was time to walk through them. Together, the letter arrived on a Tuesday because the important things always happened on Tuesdays in San Miguel. Grace Delgado, 15 years old and terrifyingly competent, read it aloud to the assembled council, a mix of townsfolk, former faction members, and the older, impossible children who'd taken on teaching roles. They're calling it the Accord of Infinite Doors, she said. Her voice carrying the same calm authority it had held at 5, deepened by years of practice. A formal treaty between all remaining factions and the San Miguel Alliance, recognition of our sovereignty, full acknowledgement that the age of using impossible children as weapons is over. The room erupted in celebration. 10 years of negotiation, conflict, and gradual change had led to this a world where different was no longer synonymous with dangerous. Elias, hair gone fully gray but spine still straight, watched from his usual corner. At 73, he'd outlived his own expectations by decades. But then, he'd had reasons to keep going, 237 of them at current. Count every impossible child who'd found sanctuary in San Miguel. You did it, John said, joining him. Isabella's husband had aged into a thoughtful teacher, beloved by students who knew nothing of his dark past. You built what Isabella dreamed of. We all built it, Elias corrected. Even you, especially you. They watched Grace field questions, her manner professional but warm. She wore her mother's determination like armor and her grandfather's protective instincts like a sword. But underneath remained the 5-year-old who'd stood in a plaza and offered the world a choice. She wants to travel, John said quietly. Visit the other sanctuary cities that have grown up. Help establish new schools. Spread the San Miguel model worldwide. I know Elias had seen the wanderlust in her eyes, the same need for adventure that had driven Isabella. She's not a little girl anymore. She'll always be your little one. Yes, but she's also her own person. Time to let her fly. That evening, as the sun painted the desert in familiar shades of gold and crimson, grandfather and granddaughter sat on the mission roof, their old tradition when big decisions needed making. So, Elias said, Paris first, or Tokyo? Grace laughed, not surprised he knew. They have a situation with time-shifted children. They need someone who understands impossible perspectives. And you want to help, it's what Mama would do. What you did, she leaned against his shoulder, 15 years old, but still seeking that familiar comfort. Will you be okay? Without me here? I'll miss you every day. But okay, yes, he wrapped an arm around her. This place runs itself now. Good teachers, good systems, and I'm not getting any younger. Time to step back, let others lead. You'll always be the heart of this place, the man who found a baby in a cabin and changed the world. No, said firmly, you changed the world. I just carried you while you did it. Proud of what they'd built, proud of who Grace had. Become when do you leave? He asked finally. Next month, after the graduation festival, she grinned. Can't miss seeing Timothy finally master orientation. For me to teach you to shoot, properly, with your mother's gun. He touched the impossible weapon at his hip. You'll need protection out there. Grandpa Grace said patiently, I can literally rewrite reality with a thought. I don't need a gun. Humor an old man. Besides, it's not about the weapon. It's about the discipline, the focus, the connection to your mother. He smiled. She'd haunt me forever if I let you leave without proper training. She probably would, Grace agreed. Then, more softly, do you ever see her? In dreams or ... otherwise, sometimes, less often now. I think ... double quotes, he paused, choosing words carefully. I think she's moved on to wherever souls go when their work here is done. But she left echoes in you, in Eroges, in every child who finds safety here. In you too, Grace said, the man you became. That's her echo too. They climbed down as full dark settled, heading home through streets lit by impossible flames that burned without heating. Other gift from one of the children. San Miguel had become a wonder, a mixture of Old West charm and impossible magic, where the extraordinary had become beautifully ordinary. At the boarding house, now expanded into a proper home, Grace hugged him goodnight. Thank you, she said, for everything. Thank you, he replied, for saving a broken old gunslinger, for showing me there was still life worth living, for being exactly who you are. She smiled Isabella's smile, bright with love and mischief. Who else would I be? Then she was gone, up to her room to plan adventures, and Elias was left standing in the hallway, marveling at how empty and full a heart could feel at the same time. A month later, he stood at the town's edge, watching the coach that would carry Grace on the first leg of her journey. She wore traveling clothes and her mother's gun, the impossible weapon, accepting her as readily as it had him. Her bags were packed with journals and teaching materials, letters of introduction, and carefully preserved memory roses. Half the town had come to see her off. Sarah, the former cleaner, gave her a compass that pointed toward those who needed help. Even Morgan, still learning to be a person rather than a function, offered a mask not to hide behind, but to remember that identity is a choice. Ready? Elias asked as the driver called for boarding. Your mother's definition exactly. She hugged him fiercely and tightly, and for a moment she was 5 again, scared and brave and trusting him to make the world safe. Then she pulled back, and she was 15, ready to make the world safe for others. "All right," she promised. "Every week, you'd better. These old eyes need something to read besides faction treaties." She laughed, climbed aboard, and then paused at the window. "Grandpa, what will you do now?" He thought about it. Time to rest, most would say. Time to fade quietly into memory. But then he looked at the impossible town around him, still growing, still changing. Saw the new children arriving, scared and powerful and needing guidance. Remembered Isabella's words about love changing shape but never ending. "Same thing I've always done," he said, "whatever needs doing. One day." At a time, the coach pulled away, carrying his granddaughter toward her destiny. Elias watched until it disappeared into the desert heat shimmer, then turned back to San Miguel. There was work to do. Children to protect, stories to tell, a legacy to tend. He walked back into town, the impossible gun at his hip, purpose in his step. Not the feared gunslinger of his youth, not the broken ghost of his middle years, but something new, a bridge between what was and what could be. Others, the doors they didn't know existed. Behind him, the desert wind whispered through memory roses, carrying the scent of love across time. And somewhere, in the spaces between heartbeats, Isabella smiled. The story went on. It always did. But this chapter, the chapter of the silent cowboy who found a baby and changed the world, that chapter was complete. Written in love, bound in sacrifice, illustrated with the impossible made real. And on the last page, in a child's careful handwriting, someone had written, "Everyone gets to choose their own story." That's the real magic. Thank you for choosing ours. Love forever, Grace. The end. If you have got this far, please leave your comment. Follow me so you can help me continue making history.